What's up, YouTube? In today's video, we're going to be reacting to the worst Super Bowl of all time. So if you've ever watched the NFL, you know that the Seahawks used to have a very good defense. And this is when the best defense in the NFL and the best offense in the NFL, who's the best offense of all time, Peyton Manning and the Broncos. But these two teams went up in a clash. If you watched the game, it was horrendous.
The year is 2014. We just finished the playoffs and we're poised for one of the most exciting Super Bowls of the modern era. Because on the surface, we have the Warden, the arguable GOAT Peyton Manning, leading his new team of the Broncos to the Super Bowl with a high-flying offense. And there's no more perfect of a foil to take on the biggest stage, the Seahawks of that year, and their legion of what we were about to get is arguably the worst Super Bowl of all time. But to understand why that is, I've got to go and give you some context. Let's start with, how about this one? Like I said, this was their second year with Mr. Manning, and they were nothing more than exceptional. They opened up their season by mopping the floor with the Ravens as Peyton sliced and diced the usually sound Baltimore defense to the tune of, get this, 462 passing yards and a whopping 7 touchdowns in that game. He followed that up by taking out his brother's-led Giants team with 2 touchdowns and 300 yards, and then bring the Raiders to their house to stomp them with pure efficiency, completing 32 of 37 passes for 370 yards and 3 touchdowns. That would be followed up by...
Bro, this was the best offense of all time, bro. If you gotta tell me something different, you're wrong, bro. The amount of explosive plays and the points scored by this team was crazy. Peyton Manning put up 55 touchdowns and broke the touchdown and throwing yard record in his season.
Back-to-back 50-point games where he would torch Philadelphia for 327 yards and 4 touchdowns, and then win the shootout against Dallas by throwing for another 414. Only drop games came in a close loss to the Colts where
So, the reason why I skipped that game is because that's the game that I like want to watch and I don't want to see the score of it.
Still connected with his receivers for 386 yards and 3 touchdowns, a loss to the Patriots, who had Manning's number, holding him to 150 passing yards, and then a loss to division rival San Diego in their second meeting of the year, while still being efficient on offense. So far, his only game under 200 yards of passing was to the Patriots, and he only had 3 games under 300 yards of passing. So the odds of him having one of those games was incredibly low, as he led the Broncos to the postseason with the #1 ranked offense in the country in yards, scoring, and just about any metric you want to look at. And that was reflected with their #1 seeding in the postseason. But now let's take a look at the other side of the bracket, because we were going to have the polar opposite. The 2013 Seattle Seahawks. You see, they posted a pretty average offense. Their quarterback, Russell Wilson, threw for less games of over 300 yards than Manning threw for games under 300 yards, and relied a lot heavier on their run game than the Broncos did, since they had the phenomenal perennial powerhouse running back Marshawn Lynch toting the rock for them. So, if their offense isn't really what won them games, then it takes the approximate IQ of a patch of moss to figure out who's carrying them, their kicker. Okay, all jokes aside, as much as that would be on brand for my channel, it was actually their defense, as you might have guessed. You had guys like Richard Sherman, Bobby Wagner, Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas that you had to line up against, all who combined together to form the frightening Legion of Boom. And boy, were they terrifying. They would do things like hold the 49ers to 3 points while forcing a safety and picking off Colin Kaepernick 3 times. They held a prime Drew Brees to 147 yards of checkdowns and a 45.2 quarterback rating. They stifled Matt Ryan to 172 passing yards, and those were the better quarterbacks they played against. Don't even get me started on if they played against lesser competition, like Kellen Clemens, who donated 2 interceptions to the Legions on a 151-yard passing performance, the turnover-prone Eli Manning, who gave them 5 interceptions as the Seahawks trounced the Giants, and that haunted Carson Palmer's dreams.
Yeah, bro, this shows you that, bro. A good defense is better than a good offense.
By picking them off 4 times.
For example, the Steelers, you know. Our defense wins us games, bro. Our offense is horrible. I'm excited to see this year with Justin Fields. And the other weapons we picked up, bro. Because you have someone good in the draft or something like offensive line or something.
Times, despite the fact that their offense wasn't able to turn enough of those, so they still lost that game. In fact, both of their back half of the season losses came in close, grindy games where neither team would score more than 20 points, with the other one being in a rematch to divisional rivals 49ers. So that brings us to the end of the season for both teams. The Broncos with a historically good and dominating offense, and the Seahawks with the scariest secondary in football history, and both teams acted like it. The Broncos had a rematch with San Diego for the third time this season, and just barely snuck past them, coming off a bye week, though sometimes teams don't come out super hot, and that's what it looked like in this case. Manning threw for 230 yards, his second lowest of the season, as they narrowly avoided a miracle comeback by Phillip Rivers' late-game heroics. But in the rematch against the Patriots, Peyton came out with a vengeance, dicing up their defense that once held them to 150 yards to the tune of 400 yards and 2 touchdowns in a decisive win against one of the NFL juggernauts at the time. And on the other side of the bracket, the Seahawks defense came through, holding a Drew Brees-led offense again to...
I think it's one of those games where, whatchamacallit, Marquise Colston tries to, get a miracle, except he throws an obvious forward pass, gets a penalty, and loses his team the game when he could have just ran out of bounds and tried to, win. But I don't know what he was doing there.
15 points, even though they required a bit of a Saints special teams disaster to carry their own offense, including 2 missed field goals and a 16-yard punt, where every one of those blunders resulted in points for the Hawks on their ensuing drive. But, like the Broncos, they were looking much more like themselves in the second game, picking off Kaepernick twice and holding him to just 150 passing yards, leaving him holding the L. And with all that out of the way, that is why everyone was hyped. The greatest offense we had seen in years, led by a Hall of Fame quarterback in his best year ever, against the stiffest challenge we would ever see. A curated team of ball batters and interceptors who would cover the field more thoroughly than the grass that they played on. And besides, we were in an era of great Super Bowls. Those blowouts of the early days were long behind us, since it had been 10 seasons since our last pretty bad blowout where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers demolished the Raiders by 27 points. And every other game felt pretty competitive, despite what the scores might have looked like. For example, what looks like a bad game with the Saints beating the Colts by 2 scores had the Colts winning all the way to the uncontested 15-point fourth quarter by the Saints. Or when the Colts beat the Bears, they entered the fourth with only a 5-point lead, then another score by, oh, hey look, it's Peyton Manning again, pushed them up to an 11-point lead, which would be the score the game would end with. So without further ado, the kickoff gets caught, and there's a questionable return from the back of the end zone to the 14-yard line. Manning takes the field and starts off in shotgun, walks forward to make an adjustment at the line of scrimmage, and the ball is snapped before he's ready, bouncing out the back of the end zone for a safety, and this would be the closest the score would be for the duration of the game. And the Seahawks wouldn't do anything different on offense than they usually would. Wilson would throw for a little over 206 yards, while they collectively would run for 135 yards on offense. It's just that the defense was absolutely stifling. The Broncos could never seem to establish any sort of run game, which their running attack wasn't the main form of how they ran their offense. It means the Seahawks could comfortably...
It would have been interesting if they had a good run defense, not a good secondary, because then, they'd be stuffing the run every play and getting sacks, but then at the same time, Peyton Manning would be cooking them, but that's not what went. Because the Seahawks secondary carries them, and not their, pass rush.
Assume that Peyton Manning was going to pass the ball, which he did 49 times. And they absolutely ate him alive. Everything resorted to short passes over the middle to receivers with absolutely zero separation who could get no yards after the catch. Manning's first pass of over 10 yards was intercepted to really set the tone that if he couldn't just zip it directly into the hands of one of his receivers, it needed to be thrown away. They didn't even pick up a first down until nearly 10 minutes into the second quarter, which was their 4th drive. But nothing offensively for the Broncos was working. The Seahawks defense was entirely too stifling. So, 2 interceptions, 2 fumbles, and a turnover on downs later, the game was entirely out of reach. match. Manning put together one scoring drive while down 36-0, where without a doubt the Seahawks were allowing plays to be made in the name of keeping everything in bounds and in front of them to try to run off clock and end this miserable game. But what we got from this game was one of the worst Super Bowl blowouts in the era of football, where we all thought Super Bowl blowouts were behind us. And aside from this miserable game, you would be right. Every Super Bowl aside from this was within 2 scores, except for when another quarterback who decided to switch teams makes it to the Super Bowl, being carried by his defense to a title. And if you know football, you know what I'm talking about. I'm looking at both of you guys, Peyton and Tom. But overall, we might never see another Super Bowl blowout.
That's crazy, like, just shows you, like, how good the Legion of Boom really was. The best offense of all time. With Peyton Manning only have, like, 3 games under, like, 300 yards. Crazy how they held them to, like, 200 yards, you said, bro? That's crazy. And the fact that they couldn't get a first down in his first pass over 10 yards was intercepted, bro. That's like a toe insteader, bro. Like, after you already get the safety, bro, you already know, bro. They're not going to be coordinated. There's going to be timings off. That's just going to go wrong for them.
This bad in our lives, and it would be better for football if that is the case. But the combination of high expectations, the era of close Super Bowls we were in, and ultimately just how piss poor this team looked during this entire game means that I think this is the worst Super Bowl that we will ever encounter.
Bro. Only touch I had was like a lucky pass that Demaryius Thomas somehow caught. He like jumped up in the air, I think, like real high, and like caught it while getting like leveled by Cam Chancellor or some other person in the secondary, bro. But that's crazy, bro. Like, like, I don't know. It's just like I didn't realize like the stats of the same were actually like in Madden. Yeah, you get a blowout, you hold someone to like 150 yards, but like I didn't realize that like how good this offense was and how good that defense was and how like they just countered each other. So that's all for today. I'll see you guys in the next one.